The big space station looked like a giant metal flower floating in the dark space. Jiwoo pressed her face against the small window of the transport ship and watched as they got closer to the massive structure. The station was so huge that their little ship looked like a tiny bug next to it. Lights blinked all over the station like stars, and Jiwoo could see hundreds of other ships docked at different ports. Each ship looked different. Some were long and thin, like metal snakes. Others were round like balls covered in spikes. A few ships glowed with strange colors that hurt to look at directly. Jiwoo was nervous. She had never been in space before and everything felt wrong. The food tasted like metal. The air smelled funny. And she kept floating a little bit even though the ship had artificial gravity. Her stomach felt sick most of the time, but she tried not to show it. The transport captain was a friendly man named Kyung-ho who worked for Earth Defense. He had kind eyes and always checked on her during the long trip from Earth to the station. Now he stood beside her looking out at the giant structure ahead. "You are 3 cycles late," he said quietly. The simulation started a long time ago. Most species sent their best warriors. Right away, Earth almost missed the chance completely. Jiwoo nodded. She knew the story. Her planet had received the invitation to join the galactic combat simulation very late. Almost too late. The message had gotten lost in space for months before, finally reaching Earth. Then it took more time to decide who should go. Every other world had sent their strongest fighters, their smartest strategists, or their most advanced technology users. Earth had chosen Jiwoo, and she still did not understand why she was small, even for a human girl. Standing just under 5 feet tall with plain black hair and normal brown eyes, she had no special powers, no advanced training, and no experience with alien technology. The selection committee had tested thousands of people. They looked for the strongest, the fastest, the smartest, the most aggressive, but in the end they picked her. A 22-year-old college student who studied patterns and liked to solve puzzles. Her friends back home thought it was crazy. Her family was worried sick, and Jiwoo herself wondered if Earth had made a terrible mistake. The transport ship docked with a soft bump that made Jiwoo grab the wall to steady herself. Captain Kyung-ho handed her a small bag with her few belongings. "Remember?" he said, his voice serious now. "Just do your best. The whole planet is watching and hoping." The airlock opened with a hiss and Jiwoo stepped into the station. The first thing that hit her was the noise. Hundreds of different languages being spoken. At once, some sounded like music. Others sounded like machines breaking. Some made no sound at all, but somehow she could still hear them in her mind. The second thing she noticed was the smell. Every species had a different scent, and they all mixed together into something that made her nose burn. A little sweet flowers mixed with hot metal and something that reminded her of old fish. The third thing was how different everyone looked. Jiwoo had seen pictures of alien species before, but seeing them in person was completely different. A group of tall gray beings with 4 arms walked past, talking in high-pitched voices that sounded like singing. Their skin looked like smooth stone, and their eyes were huge and completely black. Near the wall, a creature that looked like a walking tree was having a conversation with something that appeared to be made of living metal. The tree being spoke by changing the colors of its leaves, while the metal creature replied by making musical tones. Group of small blue aliens with tentacles instead of arms floated by in some kind of clear bubble filled with purple gas. They moved the bubble by thinking about where they wanted to go, and Jiwoo watched in amazement as they turned corners and avoided other travelers without any visible controls. But the most impressive sight was a warrior from the Vorth species. He stood nearly 8 feet tall with skin that looked like it was made of crystal. His armor was built into his body and small. Lights pulsed under his skin like a slow heartbeat. When he walked, the floor shook slightly and other aliens moved out of his way quickly. Jiwoo felt very small and very human as she made her way through the crowd. She wore simple clothes, a gray jumpsuit that all simulation participants received, brown boots, and a small ID badge that glowed with her name and planet information. That was it. No armor, no weapons, no special equipment. She followed the signs written in dozens of languages toward the registration area. The universal translator in her ear helped her understand most of what she heard, But some conversations were too complex or used concepts that did not exist in human language. The registration area was enormous, with hundreds of desks and thousands of beings waiting in different lines. Jiwoo found the line for late arrivals and took her place behind a warrior who looked like a giant insect. His exoskeleton was black and shiny, and he carried weapons that hummed with energy. The being in front of the insect warrior was even more strange. It had no solid form at all. Instead, it looked like a cloud of purple gas that occasionally formed shapes inside itself. Sometimes the gas looked like a face. Other times it became geometric patterns that hurt Jiwoo's eyes to look at directly. When Jiwoo's turn finally came, she approached the registration desk. The clerk was unlike anything she had ever imagined. He had 6 arms, each ending in a different type of hand. One hand had fingers like a human. Another had claws like a bird. A third had tentacles that moved independently. The clerk looked at her with 3 eyes that were each a different color. His name tag said Hyun-Ki in several languages, and he spoke with a voice that sounded like it came from underwater species. He asked, not looking up from his paperwork. Human, she replied. Planet of origin, Earth. The clerk finally looked at her, and all 3 of his eyes blinked at different times. He seemed surprised by something, but Jiwoo could not tell what. You are very late, he said. Most participants have been training in the simulation for 3 full cycles. The preliminary matches have already begun. I know, Jiwoo said. I came as fast as I could. Hyun-Ki looked her up, and, down with obvious doubt in his strange eyes, he had processed hundreds of warriors over the past few cycles. All of them had been impressive in some way. The Vorth with their crystal armor and energy manipulation, the Nexans with their incredible speed and plasma weapons, the Catherines with their mind powers that could bend reality itself. This human girl looked like nothing special. Do you have any weapons? He asked. No special armor, no cybernetic enhancements, no genetic modifications, no psychic abilities. Do not think so. Hyun-Ki made several notes with different hands writing in different languages at the same time. What exactly do you plan to use in combat? He asked. Jiwoo thought about this question. She had been asking herself the same thing for weeks. I plan to watch and learn, she said finally. The clerk stopped writing and stared at her with all 3 eyes. Watch and learn, he repeated slowly. Yes, Jiwoo said. That is what humans do. Best. Hyun-Ki finished her registration and handed her a small device that would track her location in the station and give her access to the simulation areas. Good luck, he said. But his tone suggested he thought she would need much more than luck. Jiwoo took the device and walked toward the preparation areas. She could feel many eyes watching her as she moved through the crowd. Some aliens looked curious. Others looked amused. A few seemed confused about why such a small, unremarkable being had been chosen to represent an entire planet. She did not let their stares bother her. Instead, she began doing what she did best. She started watching and learning. Every species moved differently. Every warrior carried their weapons in a specific way. Every alien had habits and patterns that might be important later. The preparation area was massive, with training zones for different types of combat. Jiwoo found a quiet corner where she could observe without getting in anyone's way. She sat on a simple bench and began to study her future opponents. This was going to be very interesting. The simulation arena was the most amazing thing Jiwoo had ever seen. It was a perfect sphere that could change into any place in the universe. Mountains appeared from nothing. Oceans formed in seconds. Desert planets materialized with burning sands and alien skies. The technology was so advanced that everything felt completely real. Jiwoo spent her first day watching other warriors train and fight. The preliminary rounds had been going on for days, and the competition was fierce. Every match was more incredible than the last. The Vorth champion was named Taiho, and he was terrifying to watch. He stood 8 feet tall with crystalline armor that grew from his own body. When he fought, his entire body glowed with energy that could melt steel. His favorite attack was shooting beams of pure power that could destroy buildings. The training dummies he practiced on were turned to ash in seconds. Taiho never spoke to anyone. He simply stood in his training area, destroying target after target with different types of energy attacks. Sometimes he shot lightning from his hands, other times he created balls of fire that exploded on impact. His most impressive ability was turning his entire body into living energy and moving at the speed of light. The Nexan representative was a female warrior named So Young, and she was the fastest thing Jiwoo had ever seen. So Young looked almost human except for her silver skin and large black eyes. But when she moved, she became a blur of motion that was impossible to follow with normal eyes. So Young practiced in a special chamber filled with laser beams that moved in random patterns. She danced through the deadly lights, never getting hit, even though hundreds of lasers fired at her every second. Her weapons were plasma claws that extended from her fingertips. Each claw was as sharp as a sword and could cut through any material known to science. When So Young fought in practice matches, she would appear behind her opponent. Before they even knew the fight had started, her speed was so incredible that she could strike a dozen times before her enemy could blink. Many opponents surrendered the moment they saw her move, because fighting her seemed impossible. The most frightening warrior was from the Kethran Empire. His name was Dongmin, and he could control things with his mind alone. Jiwoo watched him practice in a special chamber filled with metal objects. Dongmin would stand perfectly still, and suddenly every piece of metal in the room would start flying around him. He could reshape metal into any form he wanted. Swords became shields, shields became spears, spears became nets that moved by themselves to trap opponents. Dongmin never touched his weapons directly. Everything was controlled by his thoughts, and his mental power seemed unlimited. During one practice session, Jiwoo watched Dongmin fight 3 opponents at once. He created 6 different weapons from scrap metal and controlled all of them while also defending himself with invisible force fields. The fight lasted less than 30 seconds, and all 3 opponents were defeated without Dongmin moving. A single step, other species had their own incredible abilities. The thermal warriors could control fire and heat, making the air around them burn like a furnace. The crystalline fighters could create barriers and projectiles from nothing using some kind of matter manipulation technology. The aquatic species could control water and ice. Even in dry environments, every warrior had trained for years or even decades to perfect their abilities. Many came from military families or warrior cultures, where combat was the most important skill. Some had been genetically modified to be better fighters, others used advanced technology that was far beyond anything humans had developed. Jiwoo felt very out of place among these incredible beings. She had no special powers, no advanced weapons, and no impressive physical abilities. She was just a human girl who liked to solve puzzles and notice patterns. But she kept watching and learning because that was what she knew how to do. The other warriors mostly ignored her. Some looked at her with curiosity, wondering why such a weak-looking being had been chosen to represent an entire planet. Others seemed amused, as if they thought it was some kind of joke. A few appeared concerned that Earth had made a mistake by sending someone so obviously unprepared, but Jiwoo noticed things that others missed. She saw that Taeho always paused for exactly 2 seconds between his energy attacks. She observed that So Young always attacked from the same direction when fighting multiple opponents. She noted that Dongmin had to concentrate harder when controlling more than 4 objects at once. These small details meant nothing to most observers, but Jiwoo filed them away in her memory. Every warrior had patterns in how they moved, how they attacked, and how they defended themselves. Most were not even aware of their own habits because no opponent had ever survived long enough to notice them. The preliminary matches were scheduled in a complex bracket system with hundreds of fighters competing in different groups. Jiwoo was placed in the lowest bracket because Earth had joined so late. This meant she would face easier opponents first, but it also meant that everyone expected her to lose quickly. Her first opponent was announced 3 days after her arrival. His name was Min Ho, and he was from the Zephyrian species. The Zephyrians were known for their ability to control air and wind. They could fly without wings, create devastating storms, and attack with invisible blades made of compressed air. Min Ho was considered a mid-level fighter, not the strongest in the competition, but certainly not the weakest. He had won several matches already by using the wind to lift opponents high into the air and then dropping them. The arena safety systems prevented permanent injury, but The pain and shock of falling from great heights was enough to defeat most enemies. When Jiwoo learned about her matchup, she spent hours watching recordings of Minho's previous fights. She studied how he moved in the air, how he created his wind, attacks, and most importantly, how he reacted when his attacks were avoided or blocked. The other warriors who bothered to pay attention to her preparation were puzzled. She did not practice fighting techniques or test different weapons. Instead, she sat quietly watching the same video recordings over and over again, taking notes on a small tablet. Some aliens began making bets about how quickly Jiwoo would lose. The most optimistic gave her 30 seconds. The pessimistic bets were for less than 10 seconds. A few cruel spectators wagered that she would surrender before the fight even began. The day of her first match arrived, and the arena was set to a rocky canyon environment with strong natural winds. This was perfect for Minho because he could use the existing air currents to enhance his powers. The canyon had steep walls, narrow passages, and several deep crevices that would make flying a huge advantage. Jiwoo entered the arena, wearing the same simple gray jumpsuit she had arrived in. She carried no weapons and showed no signs of nervousness. The audience in the viewing galleries became quiet as they waited to see what would happen. Minho appeared at the opposite end of the canyon, floating several feet above the ground. His species looked like tall, thin humans with pale blue skin and white hair that moved constantly as if blown by invisible wind. His eyes were solid silver and seemed to glow with inner light. The match timer appeared in the air above them, counting. Down from 10 seconds, Jiwoo stood perfectly still while Minho rose higher into the air, preparing to attack from above. When the timer reached 0 and the match officially began, everything happened very quickly, but not in the way anyone expected. The semifinals had arrived and only 4 fighters remained standing in the entire galactic tournament. Jiwoo had somehow made it this far, despite being the smallest and seemingly weakest competitor. The other 3 were exactly who everyone had expected to reach this level. Tae-ho, the crystal-armored Vorth warrior, had destroyed every opponent with overwhelming energy attacks. So-young, the lightning-fast. Nexon had moved through her bracket like a silver blur, leaving confused and defeated enemies in her wake. And then there was Dalsu, the apex warlord from the Kethran Empire. Dalsu was everything that made the galaxy tremble with fear. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, but his height was not what made him terrifying. His body was a perfect fusion of organic tissue and the most advanced combat technology ever created. 4 powerful arms extended from his massive torso, each one capable of wielding different weapons simultaneously. His skin looked like living metal that shifted and changed color depending on his mood. Right now it was a deep red that pulsed with inner light. 2 of his arms ended in hands similar to humans, but larger and stronger. The other 2 arms had been replaced entirely with weapon systems that could fire energy beams or create force fields. But his most frightening feature was his mind. Dalsu possessed psychic abilities that could bend reality itself. He could read thoughts, predict enemy movements, and manipulate matter at the molecular level. His telekinetic powers were so strong that he could reshape entire battlefields with a single thought. Dalsu had conquered 17 star systems in his lifetime. He had never lost a single combat engagement and had faced opponents from hundreds of different species. Some enemies surrendered the moment they learned he was coming to fight them. Others tried to flee to different galaxies rather than face him in battle. The semi-final matches were held in the largest arena the station had, with viewing galleries packed with representatives from every major civilization. Everyone wanted to see if the human girl could continue her impossible winning streak against opponents of this caliber. Dalsu faced So-young first, and the fight was over. Almost before it began, So-young moved at her incredible speed, trying to attack from multiple angles at once. But Dalsu simply stood still with his eyes closed. His mind tracked her movements even when she was moving too fast to see. When So-young committed to her final attack, Dalsu opened his eyes and smiled. He had used his telekinetic powers to create an invisible net of force fields throughout the arena. So-young ran straight into the trap at full speed and was caught like an insect in a spider web. The impact knocked her unconscious immediately, and Dalsu had not even moved from his starting position. The second semi-final was between Tae-ho and a telepathic warrior from the Cylon Collective named Jae-hyun. Tae-ho fired his most powerful energy beams while Jaehyun tried to attack his mind directly. But the crystal armor that grew from Taiho's body also protected his thoughts, making him immune to psychic attacks. The battle raged for several minutes with energy beams, lighting up the arena like a laser light show. But Jaehyun had one crucial advantage. He could read Taiho's intentions and predict every attack before it happened. This let him avoid the most dangerous energy blasts and position himself for a counterattack just when it seemed like Taiho might win through pure firepower. Jaehyun used his telepathic abilities to make Taiho see illusions. The fourth warrior began firing at targets that were not really there, while the real Jaehyun approached from behind and delivered a precise strike that shut down Taiho's power systems. Now only Jiwoo and Dalsu remained for the final match. The arena was reset to a completely neutral environment, a flat circular platform with no environmental advantages for either fighter. No mountains to hide behind, no fire to fuel thermal attacks, no wind currents to ride. Just two opponents facing each other with nothing but their skills. Dalsu entered the arena like a conquering emperor. His four arms already held different energy weapons, and his presence made the air itself feel heavy with power. The viewing screens flickered from the psychic energy radiating from his mind. Jiwoo walked onto the platform wearing the same simple gray jumpsuit she had worn for every match. She looked even smaller than usual standing across from the massive warlord, but her expression was calm and focused. The audience fell silent. Everyone knew they were about to witness either the most shocking upset in galactic history or the end of the human girl's impossible journey. Dalsu had studied all of Jiwoo's previous matches. He understood her strategy now. She relied on observation, patience, and finding weaknesses in her opponent's fighting styles. His plan was simple. He would attack with such overwhelming force that she would have no time to think or analyze. The moment the match began, Dalsu unleashed everything he had. Energy beams crisscrossed the arena in deadly patterns that would have vaporized a normal person instantly. The platform itself began reshaping under his telekinetic control, creating barriers and obstacles designed to limit Jiwoo's movement options. He fired from all four weapons simultaneously, while using his mind to hurl pieces of debris and create gravitational anomalies that made the air itself dangerous to breathe. The attack was so intense that the arena's safety systems were working at maximum capacity to prevent damage to the station. Jiwoo ran, dodged, and weaved through the chaos, moving faster than she had ever moved before. She rolled under energy beams, jumped over telekinetic attacks, and somehow avoided being crushed by flying debris. The audience watched in amazement as she survived attacks that should have been impossible to escape in, but she was not fighting back. She was just surviving, and it seemed like only a matter of time before one of Dalsu's attacks would find its target. The warlord had unlimited energy reserves and could maintain this level of assault indefinitely. 5 minutes passed with the arena filled with constant explosions and energy discharges. 10 minutes passed with Jiwoo still somehow avoiding destruction. 15 minutes passed, and Dalsu began to show the first signs of strain from maintaining such an intense attack. But Jiwoo was not just running randomly, she was counting, while dodging the most devastating attacks ever unleashed in the simulation. She had been carefully tracking the timing of Dalsu's energy blasts, the rhythm of his telekinetic manipulations, the pattern of his breathing, and even the sound of his footsteps as he moved around the arena. Everything had a pattern. Everything had a rhythm. Even the greatest warrior in the galaxy could not escape the limitations of physics and biology. And after 20 minutes of careful observation while her life hung in the balance every second, Jiwoo had found what she was looking for. Dalsu had one weakness that no opponent had ever lived long enough to discover. Every 37 seconds, for exactly 0.3 of a second, he had to pause to let his cybernetic systems rebalance with his organic brain. The pause was so brief that it was invisible to normal observation. During that tiny window, his forearms would align in a specific configuration, his telekinetic field would fluctuate, and his attention would be divided between his artificial and natural components. It was the only moment when the most powerful warrior in known space was vulnerable. Jiwoo had been unconsciously timing her movements to avoid being in danger during these brief windows. But now she prepared to do something different. Instead of avoiding the 37th second, she positioned herself to take advantage of it. As Dalsu's systems entered their rebalancing cycle, Jiwoo made her move. It was not spectacular. It was not powered by advanced technology or supernatural abilities. She simply walked forward, picked up a small piece of debris that had fallen during the assault and threw it with perfect timing and precision at the exact spot where Dalsu's forearms intersected. During his rebalancing sequence, the debris weighed less than a pound and would normally have bounced harmlessly off his armor. But it struck at the precise moment when his cybernetic systems were offline. His organic reflexes were suppressed, and his telekinetic field was fluctuating. The tiny impact was enough to disrupt his neural interface, causing a cascade failure in all his augmented systems. Dalsu, the apex warlord who had never been defeated, collapsed to the arena floor, temporarily paralyzed by feedback from his own failing technology. The arena fell completely silent. In the viewing galleries, representatives from 1,000 different species stared in shock at what they had just witnessed. The most powerful warrior in the galaxy had been defeated by a human girl throwing a piece of trash. The silence in the arena stretched on for what felt like forever. Thousands of beings from across the galaxy stared at the impossible scene before them. Dalsu, the most feared warrior in known space, lay motionless on the platform, while a small, human girl stood over him holding nothing but a piece of broken debris. Jiwoo walked slowly toward the fallen warlord. Her footsteps echoed in the absolute quiet that had fallen over the massive station. She knelt beside Dalsu and gently helped him sit up as his cybernetic systems began to reboot and restore function to his body. When Dalsu could finally speak, his voice was filled with confusion and something that might have been respect. How he asked, his forearms still trembling from the system failure. How did you know? Jiwoo looked at him with kind eyes that held no anger or triumph, only understanding. I watched, she said simply. I listened. I learned. And I found the pattern that you did not know. You had. Dalsu stared at her as his advanced mind processed what had happened. No opponent in his long career had ever survived more than a few minutes against his full assault. This human had endured 20 minutes of his most devastating attacks, while somehow analyzing his every movement. You were counting, he said slowly. Beginning to understand, you were measuring my attack patterns even while dodging attacks that should have killed you. Jiwoo replied. Every living thing has rhythms. Even the strongest warrior must breathe, must think, must rest. Your cybernetic parts are very advanced, but they still need to work together with your organic brain. That creates a tiny pause that most people would never notice. But you noticed it. Dalsu said with growing amazement. You found a weakness that even I did not know existed. Jiwoo helped him stand up completely, and then did something that shocked everyone watching. She bowed deeply to Dalsu in the traditional human gesture of respect for a worthy opponent. You are an incredible fighter, she said. Your power is beyond anything I have ever seen. I only won because I had time to study your methods. If we fought again, you would probably defeat me easily because now you know about the pattern. Dalsu looked at this small human girl who had just accomplished the impossible and felt something he had never experienced before in combat. A mixture of respect, admiration, and curiosity. He had expected to face either a hidden weapon or advanced technology. Instead, he had been defeated by pure observation and thinking. The arena systems announced the end of the match and declared Jiwoo the winner of the entire galactic combat simulation. But instead of celebration, there was still an eerie quiet as everyone tried to understand what they had witnessed. Slowly, the silence began to break. Alien voices started whispering in hundreds of languages. Some spectators were confused. Others were amazed. A few seemed frightened by what they had seen in the viewing galleries. Military commanders from major civilizations were having urgent discussions about what this meant for galactic politics. If humans could analyze and defeat opponents this way, what did that mean for future conflicts? Admiral Kyung-soo from the Fourth High Command turned to his aide and spoke in a voice filled with concern. We have been thinking about warfare all wrong, he said. We focus on bigger weapons, stronger shields, faster ships, but this human girl won by understanding her enemies better than they understood themselves. Nexan strategist named In Young was speaking rapidly into a communication device. "We need to study human tactical thinking immediately," she said. "If they can find patterns that we cannot see, then our current military doctrines may be completely inadequate." The Kethrin delegation was having an even more serious discussion. Their Representative General Wu Jin looked pale as he considered the implications. If humans can find weaknesses in our most advanced warriors, what weaknesses might they find in our fleets, our defenses, our entire military structure? But the most interesting reaction came from Dalsu himself. As his systems fully recovered, he approached Jiwu with a request that surprised everyone. "Want to learn from you," he said. "Your method of combat is unlike anything I have ever encountered. Will you teach me how to see patterns the way you do?" Jiwu smiled at the request, but shook her head gently. "I cannot teach you to think like a human," she said. "But I can tell you that every species probably has their own way of seeing patterns that others miss. The key is to watch and learn from everyone around you." Word of Jiwu's victory spread throughout the galaxy, faster than light-speed communication could carry it within hours. Military academies on hundreds of worlds were requesting copies of her match recordings. Scientists wanted to study human pattern recognition abilities. Governments wanted to establish diplomatic relations with Earth, but the most significant change was in how other species viewed humanity. Before the simulation, humans had been seen as a minor species with no special abilities. Now they were recognized as having a form of intelligence that could be more dangerous than any weapon. Universities across the galaxy began offering courses in human tactical analysis. Military leaders started recruiting human advisors for their strategic planning committees. Even peaceful civilizations wanted to understand how human thinking could be applied to problems other than warfare. Jiwu became the most famous human in galactic history. Offers poured in from every major civilization. Some wanted her to join their military forces. Others offered her positions as a strategic consultant. A few even suggested that she should become an ambassador representing human interests in galactic politics, but Jiwu remained humble about her achievements. When reporters asked her how she had accomplished the impossible, she always gave the same answer: "I did not do anything special." She would say, "I just did what humans do naturally. I watched, I learned, I adapted, and I found a way to solve the problem in front of me." Every human has these abilities. We just do not always realize how powerful they can be. The tournament officials held a grand ceremony to honor Jiwu's victory. Representatives from every participating species attended, and many brought gifts and offers of alliance with Earth. The ceremony was broadcast across the galaxy and became one of the most watched events in galactic history. During her acceptance speech, Jiwu said something that would be remembered for generations. "I did not win this tournament because humans are stronger or faster or more advanced than other species," she said. "I won because humans are curious. We like to understand how things work and we never stop learning." She looked out at the audience filled with beings from 1,000 different worlds. "Each of you has abilities and ways of thinking that are amazing," she continued. "If we all learn from each other instead of just competing against each other, imagine what we could accomplish together." The speech marked the beginning of a new era in galactic relations. Instead of seeing differences as threats, civilizations began to see them as opportunities to learn and grow. Human pattern recognition became just one of many different types of intelligence that species shared with each other. Military conflicts decreased as civilizations found it more valuable to study each other than to fight. Trade and cultural exchange increased dramatically as species discovered that cooperation was more beneficial than competition. And at the center of it all was a quiet human girl who had changed the galaxy simply by doing what came naturally to her. She watched, she learned, she adapted, and she found a way to turn the greatest challenge into the greatest opportunity. Years later, when historians wrote about the tournament that changed everything, they would call it the day the galaxy learned that sometimes the most powerful weapon is not a gun or a bomb or an energy beam. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is just the willingness to pay attention. Minho launched himself high into the canyon air, moving like a graceful bird riding the strong winds. The natural air currents in the rocky canyon made him incredibly fast and agile. He could change direction instantly and attack from any angle, making him nearly impossible to hit. He started his assault immediately, sending razor-sharp blades of compressed air down toward Jiwoo. The wind blades cut deep grooves in the stone floor where she had been standing just moments before. If any of them had hit her, the match would have ended instantly. But Jiwoo was not where Minho expected her to be. She had moved to a different position and was now standing behind a large boulder, watching his attack pattern. Minho circled above her like a hunting hawk waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The audience expected Jiwoo to panic or at least try to find better cover. Instead, she did something strange. She picked up a small rock from the canyon floor and held it in her right hand. Then she just stood there watching Minho fly in circles above her. Minho created a tornado funnel and sent it spinning toward her hiding spot. The tornado was strong enough to lift a car and throw it across the canyon. Jiwoo stepped out from behind the boulder just as the tornado hit it. The rock was shattered into dust, but she was untouched. For 3 full minutes this continued. Minho attacked with every wind technique he knew, while Jiwoo dodged and moved around the canyon. She never tried to attack back. She just kept watching his movements and holding that small rock in her hand. Then something changed. Minho decided to end the fight with his most powerful technique. He rose to the highest point of the canyon and began gathering all the wind in the area into one massive attack. The air itself became visible as it swirled around him in a giant spiral of destruction. This was his signature move. The attack that had defeated every opponent he had ever faced. Minho would dive, straight down at incredible speed surrounded by a hurricane of cutting wind. Nothing could survive the impact. He began his dive moving faster than a falling meteor. The entire canyon shook from the force of the wind around him. This was the moment. Everyone expected Jiwoo to be defeated. Instead, she did something that made no sense to anyone watching. She stepped directly into Minho's path and threw her small rock straight up at him. The rock was tiny compared to the massive wind attack coming down at her. It should have been destroyed instantly by the hurricane-force winds. But Jiwoo had thrown it at exactly the right moment and exactly the right angle. The rock hit Minho just as he reached the fastest part of his dive. It struck him in the center of his chest at the precise instant when he was most committed to his attack and could not change direction. The impact was small, but it disrupted his concentration for just a fraction of a second. That tiny disruption was enough. The hurricane of wind around Minho became unstable, and instead of protecting him, it began tearing at his body. He lost control of his flight and crashed hard into the canyon wall. The safety systems activated immediately to prevent serious injury, but Minho was unconscious and the match was over. Jiwoo had won her first fight by throwing a rock. The arena fell completely silent for several seconds. Nobody could understand what had just happened. The most spectacular aerial attack anyone had ever seen had been defeated by the simplest possible counterattack. In the viewing galleries, alien spectators whispered to each other in dozens of languages, trying to figure out what they had witnessed. Some thought it was pure luck. Others suspected that Jiwoo had used some kind of hidden technology that their sensors could not detect. But a few of the more experienced military observers began to realize something important. Jiwoo had not gotten lucky. She had studied Minho's attack patterns and found the exact moment when he would be most vulnerable. It was not magic or advanced technology. It was just very careful observation and perfect timing. Jiwoo's second match was scheduled for the next day. Her opponent was a thermal warrior named Seong-min who could control fire and heat. His species looked like humans made of living lava with skin that glowed red hot and eyes like burning coals. Seong-min fought in an arena set to look like the inside of a volcano. The air was filled with ash and the ground was covered with pools of molten rock. This environment gave him a huge advantage because he could draw power from all the heat around him. When the match began, Seong-min immediately covered himself in flames and began hurling fireballs the size of cars at Jiwoo. The heat was so intense that the air itself seemed to burn, and the volcanic arena became even hotter as he fed more energy into the environment. Jiwoo ran and dodged, just like in her first match. But this time, she was looking for something specific. She had spent hours studying recordings of Seong-min's previous fights and had noticed something that no one else had seen. All of his flame attacks followed the same spiral pattern. It was beautiful to watch. Like a deadly dance, but it was also predictable. Seong-min was not even aware that he did this because the pattern was built into his species, natural fighting instincts. While dodging his attacks, Ji-woo positioned herself near some shiny metal surfaces that were part of the arena decoration. When Seong-min launched his biggest fireball attack, she used the reflective surfaces like mirrors to redirect his own flames back at him. The redirected fire hit Seong-min at the exact moment when his defensive flames were at their weakest because he was focused on attacking. The feedback from his own fire overwhelmed his heat resistance and he collapsed from thermal shock. Another impossible victory. Another opponent defeated by using their own power against them. Word began to spread throughout the station about the strange human girl who won fights in ways that made no sense. Ji-woo's third opponent was a crystalline warrior named Ye-jin, who could create protective barriers and sharp projectiles from crystallized energy. Ye-jin was confident that her defensive abilities would be enough to stop whatever trick Ji-woo tried to use. She created multiple layers of crystal shields around herself and filled the arena with floating crystal spears that moved according to her will. But Ji-woo had studied the recordings of Ye-jin's fights too, and she had noticed that all the crystal constructs formed from the same central point in Ye-jin's chest. It was like a power source that fed energy to everything she created. Instead of trying to break through the crystal barriers, Ji-woo found a way to attack that central point directly. She used debris from the arena to create a simple lever system that launched a projectile with just enough force to disrupt Ye-jin's power source. When the central point was hit, all of Ye-jin's crystal constructs shattered at once, leaving her defenseless and shocked. The match ended with another mysterious victory for the human girl. By now, military strategists from dozens of species were studying Ji-woo's matches, trying to understand her methods. Some thought she had psychic abilities that let her predict the future. Others believed she was using quantum computers hidden in her brain. The truth was much simpler and much more frightening. Ji-woo was just thinking. She watched her opponents, carefully found their patterns and weaknesses, then used those discoveries to win fights with minimal effort. Each victory was different, because each opponent was different. But the method was always the same. Observe, analyze, and find the one moment when even the strongest enemy would be vulnerable. The other competitors began to take notice of her. The great warriors who had ignored her before now watched her matches with growing concern. They realized that this small, quiet human might be more dangerous than any of them had imagined. As the tournament progressed toward the semifinals, only the strongest fighters remained, and they all began to wonder the same thing. What would happen when Ji-woo faced an opponent who had no obvious patterns or weaknesses? That question was about to be answered.